My name is Nora. 6 weeks before I was supposed to marry the man I loved, his oldest friend flew in for the wedding, a woman I'd never met, who was only supposed to be in town for a handful of days. I didn't know, that week, that she was about to become the reason I finally understood the difference between the life I thought I wanted and the one I actually did. This is the story of what happened between a welcome dinner and a wedding day, and the choice I never saw coming until I was already making it. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house when two people stop really talking to each other, even though they're still saying all the right words. I'd gotten so used to that quiet that I almost didn't notice it anymore. 6 weeks before the wedding, and my life looked, on paper, exactly the way I'd always pictured it. A fiancé who loved me. A guest list finalized. A dress hanging in a garment bag in the closet, wrapped in plastic like something too fragile to touch. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was, and I kept agreeing with them, because it was true, and because it was easier than saying anything else. Daniel wasn't a bad man. I want to say that clearly, because it matters. He was kind, and he was steady, and when we first got together, he used to leave notes on the kitchen counter just because he'd thought of me in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. But somewhere between setting the date and counting down the weeks, something in him had gone quiet too. He started pouring a glass of something the moment he walked in the door, and then another, until the notes stopped and the conversations got shorter and shorter, whittled down to logistics. The caterer, the seating chart, what time the florist was coming on Saturday. I told myself it was nerves. Everyone got nervous before a wedding, didn't they? I told myself that a lot, actually, in those last few weeks. I told myself things the way you tell a child a story to get them to fall asleep, except I was the one telling it, and I was the one lying awake. That night, like most nights, he fell asleep on the couch with the television still on, an empty glass sweating a ring into the coffee table. I sat across from him for a long time, just watching the shapes the light made on his face, trying to remember exactly when I'd started feeling more like his roommate than the woman he was about to marry. I didn't cry. I'd stopped doing that months ago, around the time I realized it didn't change anything. Instead, I opened my laptop and went back to the wedding folder, the one with every detail color-coded and accounted for, because if I couldn't fix the quiet in my own living room, at least I could make sure the reception timeline was perfect. That was the version of control I had left. There was one line on the guest list I hadn't really thought about until that moment. Daniel's oldest friend, flying in from overseas the day before the rehearsal dinner. Someone he'd known since they were kids, back before I existed in his life at all. I'd heard the stories over the years. I'd never once met her. I remember thinking, almost idly, that it would be nice to have one more friendly face in a church full of people who'd known Daniel far longer than they'd known me. I had no idea that night, closing the laptop and turning off the lights in a house that felt emptier than it should have, 6 weeks before my own wedding, how much that one name on the guest list was about to change everything. The welcome reception was held in the private room of a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with low lighting and too many candles, chosen specifically so the out-of-town guests would have somewhere to land before the wedding weekend really began. I'd been there for over an hour, working the room the way brides are supposed to, hugging people I only vaguely remembered from Daniel's side of the guest list, when he caught my elbow and steered me toward the entrance with something like excitement on his face. I hadn't seen that expression on him in weeks. "She's here," he said, and I didn't have to ask who he meant. I'd built a picture of her over the years without ever meaning to, stitched together from the stories Daniel told the way people tell stories about someone who mattered to them a long time ago. I'd imagined someone loud, maybe. Someone who took up a lot of space, the way childhood best friends who move across the ocean and never quite come back always do in your imagination. She wasn't loud at all. She came through the door with a suitcase she hadn't had time to drop off yet, hair a little windblown from the flight, and she looked tired in the specific way people look tired after crossing several time zones and pretending the whole way that they weren't dreading something. Daniel crossed the room to her first, and I watched them hug, watched him laugh at something she said before she'd even finished saying it. watched 8 years of distance disappear in about 4 seconds. Then he turned and brought her over to me, his hand warm on my back, and said the words he'd clearly been looking forward to saying for weeks. "Rachel, this is Nora. Nora. Finally. This is Rachel. Finally." Like I was the one who'd been missing from the equation. "It's so good to actually meet you," she said, and her handshake was firm, her eyes doing that quick, searching thing people do when they're trying to figure out if a person lives up to everything they've heard about them. "Daniel talks about you like you hung the moon." "He talks about you like you invented childhood," I said, and she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and something in my chest loosened slightly that I hadn't realized was tight. We didn't get much more than that before Daniel got pulled toward a cluster of his college friends who'd already started on the bar's more expensive whiskey. The kind of pull that happens fast and apologetic. His hand lifting off my back with a 1 second, I promise, that I already knew meant 20 minutes at least. Rachel watched him go with the fond, exhausted patience of someone who'd been managing that particular friend group since they were all 17. "Some things don't change," she said, mostly to herself. "You'd know better than me," I said. "You've got 8 years on me." 17, actually. We were 9. I hadn't expected that number to land the way it did. 9 years old. An entire childhood I'd never be able to access, running alongside a decade of adulthood I'd built with him from scratch. For a second I felt something uncomfortably close to jealousy, though I couldn't have told you in that moment exactly who I was jealous of. "I should probably go rescue my suitcase from the coat check," she said, glancing toward the door. "I'll walk you," I said, before I'd really decided to say it. We didn't get far. A waiter came by with a tray of champagne, and someone called her name from across the room, one of Daniel's cousins wanting an introduction, and the current of the party pulled us both back into it the way parties do. But as she turned to greet the cousin, she caught my eye over her shoulder for just a second, like she was checking whether I'd actually meant it about walking her, and something passed between us in that half second that I didn't have a name for yet and wasn't sure I wanted one. I told myself it was nothing. New people were interesting. That was all this was. I had no way of knowing. Watching her disappear into the crowd of Daniel's relatives, laughing at something the cousin said, that it was the last easy moment either of us would have that night. The rest of the party moved around us like weather we'd both decided to stay out of. I found her again near the bar sometime later, the crowd having thinned enough that neither of us could easily use it as an excuse to drift off toward someone else. And for a while we did the polite orbiting that new acquaintances do at other people's parties, trading small pieces of information. Where she'd been living, what she did for work, something involving old buildings and blueprints that she explained with more enthusiasm than I expected from someone who'd just crossed an ocean. How she took her whiskey, which turned out to be neat, no ice, no apology. "So how does someone become friends with Daniel Whitfield at 9 years old?" I asked, mostly to keep the conversation going. "And still be friends with him at, 34? She considered the question longer than I expected, turning her glass a quarter turn on the bar top. "He moved in next door the summer his parents split up," she said. "Nobody talked to him for like a week. He just sat on his porch steps every afternoon like he was waiting for something to happen to him instead of the other way around." "So you happened to him?" "Somebody had to." There was something in the way she said it, dry but not unkind, that made me laugh before I'd fully processed why it was funny. She looked briefly startled by the sound, like she hadn't expected to get a real laugh out of me either, and something about that small mutual surprise made the air between us shift half a degree warmer. "That's the version he tells too," I said, "minus the part where you make it sound like charity work." It was a little bit charity work. He was a very sad 9-year-old. "He talks about you like you're the only person who's known him his whole life without an agenda." Rachel went quiet at that, and for a second I thought I'd said something wrong, overstepped some boundary I couldn't see the edges of yet. Then she said more carefully, "I think that's probably true of both of us, honestly. Everyone who knows me now only knows the version I built after I left. He's the only one who remembers the one before. I understood that better than I wanted to admit. There was a version of me too, from before Daniel, before this city, before I'd learned to describe myself in relation to a wedding date. I couldn't remember the last time I'd said anything true about who I used to be to anyone at all. That sounds lonely, I said, before I could stop myself. It has its moments, she said, and there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, quickly smoothed over, that told me I'd gotten closer to something real than either of us had planned on. She glanced toward the noise of the party, the knot of Daniel's friends getting steadily louder near the bar, and then back at me. I don't suppose there's somewhere quieter in this place. There's a lounge in the back. I saw it earlier when I was hiding from the seating chart conversation. Lead the way, she said. One drink. I've been awake for something like 20 hours, and I refuse to do the rest of this conversation shouting over your fiancé's college roommates. I told myself, walking ahead of her toward the back of the restaurant, that this was simply what a good future sister-in-law did, made the out-of-town guest feel welcome. Nothing about the way my chest felt lighter than it had in weeks needed any further explanation than that. I was already starting to lie to myself, and I didn't even know it yet. The lounge was empty, except for the low hum of jazz coming through hidden speakers, and a single bartender who took one look at us, poured 2 glasses of something amber without being asked, and disappeared into the back like he understood exactly what kind of conversation needed privacy. We took the corner booth, the velvet worn soft in the way old furniture gets when enough people have sat in exactly the same spot trying to say something true. 20 hours awake and you still have better posture than me, I said, mostly to fill the silence while she got settled. Old habit. I spent a decade in rooms full of men twice my age who were looking for a reason not to take me seriously. You learn to sit like you belong there before you actually believe it. Does it work? The posture. Eventually, you stop noticing you're doing it, and by then it's not a costume anymore. It's just how you sit. She turned her glass a slow quarter circle, watching the light catch in it rather than looking at me. I missed my father's second wedding for a job in Lisbon. Told everyone it was unavoidable. Really, I just couldn't sit in a room and watch him promise someone else forever when I still wasn't sure he'd meant it the first time. So I built a whole life where I never had to find out if I could sit through things like that. Turns out you can build an entire career out of avoiding one uncomfortable Sunday afternoon. She said it lightly, like a joke she'd told enough times to sand the edges off. But something in the set of her jaw told me the edges were still there underneath. That's not lonely, I said. That's armor. Same thing most days. She looked at me properly then, like she was deciding whether to let the next thing out. What about you? What's your version of the Lisbon job? I hadn't planned on answering honestly. I'd had a version ready for months, the one I gave at showers and fittings. All soft edges and gratitude. The one where I was simply the luckiest woman in 3 counties. But something about the emptied-out restaurant, the second glass, her not-quite smile waiting for whatever I actually said, made the easy version feel unbearable to produce. I said yes to a dress I didn't love. I said instead. My mother cried. My future mother-in-law cried. The consultant cried. And I think she cries at every appointment. That's probably in her job description. And I stood there in the mirror not crying, feeling like the one thing everybody needed from me was to be moved, and I couldn't make myself feel it. So I just said yes, so nobody would notice I hadn't. I've been saying yes like that for months. I'm getting very good at it. Rachel didn't say anything right away. She just watched me, and it wasn't pity in her face, which was the thing I was braced for and dreading. It was something closer to recognition, like I'd described a room she'd also stood in once. That's not lonely either, she said quietly. That's armor too. You're just better at hiding the seams than I am. The bar noise had gone distant somewhere behind us, the party continuing without either of us in it. And for a moment, neither of us moved to fill the quiet that followed. I was aware, in a way I didn't have words for yet, of exactly how close her hand was to mine on the table, and of the fact that I hadn't looked away from her in longer than felt entirely explainable. "Rachel," I started, not even sure what I meant to say after her name. The door to the lounge banged open, 3 of Daniel's groomsmen spilling in loud and unsteady, one of them already announcing that they'd found the good hiding spot, and whatever had been about to happen in that quiet dissolved into noise before either of us could name it. The groomsmen dragged us back into the party by the elbows, laughing too loud about a lost bride and best woman. And for the next hour, I performed the version of myself that knew how to work a room. I refilled drinks I didn't finish. I let Daniel's aunt tell me the story of her own wedding day for what must have been the 4th time that month. I laughed at the right moments and touched Daniel's arm when he found me again, distracted and pink-cheeked from whiskey, and told him it was a wonderful party, because it was, and because I didn't have another sentence ready that wouldn't have given something away. Across the room, Rachel was doing the same thing, I noticed. Fielding cousins. Answering the same 3 questions about Lesbian over and over with the patience of someone well-practiced at being interesting to strangers. Every so often our eyes would catch by accident, and something would pass between us too quick to examine, and then we'd both look away like we hadn't meant to look at all. By the time the party started thinning, my face ached from smiling, and my future mother-in-law had cornered me near the coat check for a conversation about flower arrangements that felt like it might never end. I excused myself the first chance I got, stepping out through the side door for air, and found Rachel already there, leaning against the brick with her jacket over one arm, looking up at whatever stars managed to fight through the city light. "Hiding too," she said. Not a question. "Your future sister-in-law duties are exhausting," I said, coming to lean beside her. "How do people do this every weekend?" "They don't. Most people just have the one wedding." She glanced at me sideways. "You get one shot at this. I keep forgetting that, watching everyone treat it like a formality." "Some days it feels like a formality." I hadn't meant to say that part out loud. It sat there between us in the cold air. More honest than anything I'd said to anyone in weeks. And Rachel didn't rush to fill the silence after it, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. "For what it's worth," she said eventually, "you're not what I expected." Daniel described someone a lot softer. "You're..." She paused, searching for it. "Sturdier than that. I like it better." "You're not what I expected either. I thought I'd hate you a little, honestly. 8 years of Daniel telling me how well you two just get each other. And now I think I understand why." Neither of us moved for a second. The cold made everything feel closer than it was, her shoulder inches from mine, her jacket slipping slightly off her arm, and when she shifted to catch it, her hand landed for half a second against the back of mine on the brick ledge between us. Neither of us pulled away right away. It was nothing. It was 3 seconds, maybe 4. It felt like the longest thing that had happened to me in 6 weeks. Then the side door swung open and Daniel leaned out, keys already jingling in his hand, telling us everyone was heading back to the hotel and asking if we'd seen where his sister put the gift bags. "Right behind you," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Walking back inside, I could still feel the exact spot on my hand where hers had been, like a temperature that hadn't faded yet. The hotel lobby at midnight looked like the aftermath of something. Gift bags stacked haphazardly by the concierge desk, one of Daniel's groomsmen loudly relitigating a bet from earlier in the night, another one asleep, upright, against a pillar. Daniel had his arm slung around my shoulders in the particular way he did when he'd had exactly enough whiskey to be affectionate, and not quite enough to be difficult, murmuring something about how good it felt to have everyone together, how happy he was, how happy I must be too. "So happy," I agreed, and meant it, in the abstract way you mean things you've said too many times to feel anymore. Getting everyone sorted into rooms took longer than it should have. Someone had the wrong key. Someone's suitcase had been left at the restaurant. Daniel's best man, the drunkest of the group by a wide margin, insisted on giving a toast in the elevator that nobody had time for, and everybody had to sit through anyway. One arm braced against the mirrored wall, solemnly informing us all that Daniel was getting the best woman in the state, which struck me in that moment as a strange thing to call me in front of the actual best woman standing 4 feet away with her arms crossed, fighting a smile she was clearly trying to suppress out of kindness to him. By the time we reached our floor, Daniel had gone from affectionate to nearly asleep on his feet, and I found myself half steering him down the hallway, while his best man continued narrating the whole thing like a nature documentary. Rachel walked just behind us, quiet, occasionally reaching out to steady one of the groomsmen who kept listing sideways into the wall art. "I've got him from here," I told her, once we'd deposited the best man in his room with instructions to drink an entire bottle of water before he did anything else. Daniel was leaning against our doorframe, eyes half closed, already murmuring something about how tomorrow they were going fishing, an activity I was fairly certain had never once been discussed. "You sure?" Rachel asked. "He's not light." "I've had practice," I said, and got the door open, and got him inside, and got him onto the bed, where he was asleep within about 90 seconds, still half in his shoes. I stood there for a moment looking down at him, at the boy Rachel had described on a porch step 25 years ago, at the man I was supposed to marry in 6 days, and felt a wave of something that wasn't quite guilt yet, but was standing close enough to it that I didn't examine it too hard. When I stepped back out into the hallway to find something for the headache I could already feel coming, the corridor was empty except for Rachel, still there, leaning against the wall a few doors down, apparently waiting to make sure I didn't need help. "You didn't have to wait," I said. "I know," she said. "I did anyway." The hallway was very quiet by then, the kind of hotel corridor quiet that makes everything feel slightly outside of real time, and neither of us moved to end the conversation the way people usually do at the end of a long night. Her door was just past mine and Daniel's, close enough that we were, for the moment, the only 2 people awake on the entire floor. I had no idea, standing there in the too bright hallway light with my future husband asleep in his shoes 20 feet away, that the next 60 seconds were about to undo 6 weeks of very careful lying to myself. We stood there for a moment without saying anything, the hallway light doing that flat, unflattering thing. Hotel lighting always does, and somehow it still felt like the softest moment of the whole night. "You don't have to keep watching out for me," I said, finally, because the silence had gone on long enough that someone needed to say something ordinary. "I promise I know how to walk 20 feet to my own door." "I know you do." She shifted her weight against the wall, arms still loosely crossed, in no apparent hurry to go anywhere. "It's not really about the 20 feet. I didn't ask what it was about. I wasn't sure I wanted the answer, or maybe I wanted it too much, and either way, it felt safer not to reach for it. "Long week ahead of you," I said instead. "Fittings, rehearsal, all of it. You didn't have to fly 14 hours for any of this." "Yes, I did," she said simply, like it wasn't even a question worth debating. She pushed off the wall then, and took a step toward me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey and something underneath it. Cedar, maybe. Or just the particular smell of someone who'd been traveling all day and hadn't had the chance to feel like themselves yet. She reached out, not for any reason I could name, maybe just to say goodnight properly, and her hand found mine where it hung at my side. "If you need anything this week," she said, "and I mean anything, boring or not, wedding-related or not, you can count on me. I mean that." Her hand stayed on mine a beat longer than the sentence needed. 2 seconds. 3. I could feel every one of them separately. The warmth of her palm against my knuckles, her thumb barely moving, like she was deciding whether to hold on or let go, and hadn't quite finished deciding. I didn't pull away. I told myself later that I simply hadn't reacted in time. But the truth was, I hadn't wanted to. "Good night, Rachel," I made myself say, and made myself mean it as an ending. "Good night, Nora." I turned toward my own door. My heart was doing something entirely unreasonable for a hallway goodnight, between a bride and her fiancé's oldest friend. A fast, high, insistent thing in my chest that had no business being there 6 days before my wedding. I took one step, then a second. Then I stopped. I don't know what made me look back. I've turned the moment over so many times since that I've lost the ability to remember it honestly. Whether it was instinct or intention, whether some part of me already knew what I'd see. But I looked back anyway. And there she was, still standing exactly where I'd left her, arms loose at her sides now, watching me go instead of turning toward her own door, the way any reasonable person says goodnight and does. She hadn't moved at all. We stood there, 20 feet of hotel carpet between us, neither one pretending anymore that this was about anything so simple as being polite to an out-of-town guest. I don't know how many seconds passed before my feet started moving again, only that they moved the wrong direction, back toward her instead of toward my own door, and that by the time I understood what I was doing, I was already too close to stop. "This is a terrible idea," I said, which was true, and which I said anyway, standing close enough now that I could see her breath catch slightly at the sound of my voice this near to her. "Probably," she agreed, not moving an inch away. I don't remember deciding to close the last of the distance between us. I remember the warmth of the wine still loose in my blood, and the particular recklessness of a hallway at 1 a.m, and 6 weeks of a silence I'd been carrying alone, finally breaking apart all at once. I kissed her before either of us could talk ourselves out of it, and she met it immediately, one hand coming up to the side of my face like she'd been waiting all night for permission to do exactly that. It wasn't careful. It wasn't the kind of kiss either of us would have been able to explain reasonably in the cold light of morning. Her hand slid into my hair, mine found the front of her shirt, and neither of us pulled back to check if this was a mistake, because some part of both of us had clearly already decided it didn't matter. She reached behind her without looking, found the handle of her door, and we were inside before I'd fully registered leaving the hallway, the door clicking shut and the lock turning under her hand like an afterthought. Neither of us wanted to interrupt to properly finish. I'm not going to tell you everything about that night. Some of it belongs only to the two of us, and some things are truer left unsaid than described. What I'll say is this. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't the perfect bride, or the grateful girlfriend, or the woman everyone kept congratulating on her extraordinary luck. I was just myself, entirely, with a woman who looked at me like she saw exactly who that was, and had no intention of looking away. We fell asleep somewhere near dawn, her hand still loosely tangled with mine on the pillow between us. Both of us finally, impossibly quiet in the good way instead of the empty one. I woke to a fist knocking on the door, sharp and insistent, and a voice in the hallway calling Rachel's name. Rachel woke faster than I did, already halfway sitting up before I'd fully surfaced, blinking at the light coming gray and thin through the curtains. For one suspended second, before the knocking registered as anything urgent, I let myself feel it. Her hand still loose in mine. The quiet that wasn't empty. A version of freedom I hadn't let myself imagine wanting until about 6 hours ago, now sitting in my chest like something I couldn't put back. Then the knock came again, harder, and a voice with it. "Rachel. Nora, honey. You in there? Have either of you seen Nora?" Daniel's father. We moved fast after that. The particular fast of two people who don't need to discuss what's happening to understand exactly how bad it would look. I was up and reaching for my dress before I'd even fully processed whose voice it was. Rachel already pulling a sweater over her head. Both of us moving in the kind of silent, efficient panic that doesn't leave room for anything except the next necessary motion. She smoothed the bedspread with one hand, while I checked my hair in the mirror over her dresser. And for half a second, our eyes met in the reflection. A whole conversation passing between us that neither of us had time to have out loud. She opened the door before he could knock a third time, her voice coming out easy and unbothered in a way that impressed me even through the panic. "Morning. Everything okay?" Sorry, Daniel's father said, already looking past her into the room. "I've been trying Nora's phone for 20 minutes. Her mother's having some kind of crisis about the seating chart, and I—" He spotted me by the mirror, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "There you are. Why didn't you answer?" "Phone died," I said, and it came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Daniel's friends kept him up half the night with that ridiculous elevator toast, and I think between the whiskey and everybody needing a babysitter, I just crashed in the nearest room that wasn't a war zone. Half the groomsmen were still awake at 4 a.m., singing something to the vending machine. Rachel added, deadpan, leaning against the doorframe like this was the most unremarkable thing in the world. I offered her the couch before she ended up sharing a room with someone's cousin who snores. It came out so smoothly, so exactly the right texture of mundane, that I almost believed it myself. Daniel's father laughed, already reaching for his own phone. "Can't say I blame you. This family does not know how to pace itself." He glanced at me, softer now. "Go deal with your mother before she reorganizes the entire reception. And eat something, you look pale." "On it," I said, and he was already halfway down the hall before the door had fully closed behind him. We stood there a moment in the sudden quiet, the lie still hanging in the air between us, disturbingly easy to have told. "That was too smooth," I said. "We're good at that. That's not a good sign." "No," Rachel agreed, not quite meeting my eyes now that the adrenaline was fading and something more complicated was rushing in to take its place. "It really isn't." Neither of us said what we were both thinking, which was that we had 6 days left before the wedding, and no idea anymore how either of us was supposed to survive them. The days that followed moved with the particular cruelty of a calendar nobody could slow down. Dress fittings. A florist appointment that ran long because my mother couldn't decide between 2 shades of white that looked, to me, exactly identical. A bridal luncheon my future mother-in-law insisted on hosting at her club, chandeliers and cucumber sandwiches, and a dozen women asking me if I was excited in a tone that made it clear only one answer was acceptable. Rachel and I had, without ever discussing it out loud, arrived at an arrangement. We simply didn't end up alone together. It wasn't hard to manage, not with a wedding this size generating a constant supply of errands and appointments and relatives needing rides from the airport. She helped Daniel with groomsmen logistics. I drowned in bridesmaid logistics. When our paths did cross, it was always in a crowd, always with enough other people present that the conversation stayed exactly as shallow as it needed to be. It was working, mostly, until the luncheon. She hadn't been invited, technically, being on Daniel's side of things, but she'd come by briefly to drop off a card table Daniel's mother had asked to borrow, and got swept into the room before she could make her escape. I saw her the moment she walked in, and something in my chest did the thing it had been doing all week. A small, treacherous lift I immediately tried to smother. "Rachel, come sit! We're just getting to the good gossip," one of my bridesmaids called out, already pulling a chair from an empty table. She sat 2 seats down from me, close enough that I could feel the specific effort it took not to look at her directly. And for 20 minutes the conversation moved around us in its usual loud, champagne-soaked circles. Then my aunt, 3 glasses in and delighted with herself, leaned across the table with the particular gleam of someone about to say something she thought was charming. "You two looked thick as thieves at the welcome party," she said, glancing between us. "Hiding out back there together for ages. What on earth were you talking about?" The table went, for half a second, exactly as quiet as it needed to for the question to feel enormous. "Wedding logistics?" Rachel said. At the exact same moment I said, "Nothing, really." And the mismatch hung there for a beat too long before my aunt laughed it off as nothing, already moving on to some other piece of gossip, already forgetting she'd asked at all. But Rachel's eyes had come up to mine for just a second during that beat, and I saw something flicker across her face that looked almost like fear. She left not long after, citing errands for Daniel, and I spent the rest of the luncheon smiling through a conversation about napkin folds, while replaying the sound of our 2 answers colliding in the air, over and over, unable to stop. That night, lying awake next to Daniel's empty side of the bed, he'd fallen asleep early again, worn out from wedding errands. I got a text from a number I'd only had for a week. I looked at flights tonight. There's one Thursday morning. I could tell everyone something came up at work. I stared at it for a long time before I understood what she was actually asking me, which wasn't permission, not exactly. It was whether I wanted her to make this easier for both of us by disappearing, before either of us had to find out what happened if she stayed. I didn't answer right away. I'm not sure, even now, what stopped me. I didn't answer the text that night. I told myself I'd think about it in the morning, which was its own kind of answer. The coward's answer. The one that let the decision make itself. By morning, it had. Daniel came into the kitchen while I was still holding my coffee like a life raft, phone face down on the counter beside me, and announced with the particular pleased energy of a man who thought he was fixing something that he'd already talked to Rachel about staying through the wedding instead of flying out early, like she'd apparently mentioned to him. She said something about work needing her back, he said, pouring his own coffee, oblivious to the way my whole body had gone still. I told her that was ridiculous. She hasn't seen me get married. She's not allowed to miss it over some spreadsheet emergency. You talked her into staying, I said carefully. Of course I did. Besides, he added, and this was the part that stayed with me long after he'd left for his final tuxedo fitting. You seem calmer when she's around. Have you noticed that? You've been so wound up about all this, and then Rachel shows up and you actually laugh again. I think she's good for you. He said it so simply, so entirely without suspicion, that I couldn't even be angry at him for it. He was right, in his own way, about something he had absolutely no idea he was right about, and the unfairness of that his kindness kept accidentally building the exact trap I was trying to climb out of, sat in my stomach like a stone the rest of the morning. I found her an hour later at the venue, going over table arrangements with the coordinator, ostensibly a favor to Daniel's mother, though I suspected she'd taken the task specifically because it gave her somewhere to be that wasn't near me. She looked up when I walked in, and something crossed her face fast enough that I almost missed it. Relief, maybe, or its opposite. You didn't text back, she said, once the coordinator had wandered off toward the kitchen with her clipboard. Daniel already unbooked your flight for you, I said. Apparently I laugh more when you're around. He thinks you're good for me. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, the way people do when a joke lands somewhere it really shouldn't. That's not funny. No, I agreed. It really isn't. I offered to leave, Nora. I meant it. It would have been so much simpler for both of us. I know. And you didn't answer. I know that too. I picked up one of the place cards from the table between us, turning it over without reading it, needing something to do with my hands. I couldn't tell if I didn't answer because I wanted you to stay, or because some part of me is punishing myself by making you stay. I still don't know which one it is. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I hadn't seen on her yet. Something more careful than the ease she usually wore, like she was handling something breakable. For what it's worth, she said finally. I didn't book the flight either. Before he even said anything. I sat there with the page open for 20 minutes, and I never pressed confirm. We stood there on opposite sides of a table set for a wedding neither of us seemed capable of stopping, 5 days away now instead of 6, and something passed between us that felt less like the reckless heat of the hallway and more like the quiet, terrifying certainty of two people who just admitted, without quite saying it, that neither of them had ever really wanted the easy way out. The task, this time, was addressing envelopes for the last of the out-of-town gifts, a chore small enough that nobody thought twice about assigning the two of us to a corner of the reception hall, with a box of stationery and a guest list 100 names long. My future mother-in-law had suggested it, entirely innocent, some comment about how nice it would be for us to get to know each other properly before the big day. If she'd known what she was actually engineering, she would have handed the box to literally anyone else. We sat across from each other at a folding table, working through the list in careful silence, and for the first 20 minutes it was almost fine. I read names off my half of the list. Rachel wrote them in a handwriting so much neater than mine that I found myself watching her pen instead of my own. "You've got very deliberate handwriting," I said, mostly to fill the quiet. "Like an architect's. Occupational hazard. You draw enough blueprints, you start treating every letter like it has load-bearing responsibilities." I laughed, the sound coming easier than it should have this close to the wedding, this close to her, and she looked up at exactly the wrong moment to catch it, something warm crossing her face before she caught herself and looked back down at the envelope in front of her. We tried, after that, to keep things purely mechanical. Name, address, seal, next. But somewhere around the 40th envelope, our hands reached for the same pen at the same time, and neither of us pulled back fast enough, her fingers brushing mine for the length of a breath before we both retreated to our own sides of the table like the folding chairs had suddenly gone electric. "This is ridiculous," I said, to the tablecloth more than to her. "Which part?" "All of it. Sitting here writing my own wedding invitations overflow with you like nothing happened. Like I didn't spend the whole luncheon 2 seats away from you trying not to look at your hands." Rachel set her pen down carefully, like she needed both hands free for whatever she was about to say. "I've been trying to convince myself this week that it was the wine, that it would have happened with anyone, that night, in that hallway, that it wasn't specific to you." "Has it worked?" "No." She looked up at me, steady now in a way that undid me more than any amount of hallway recklessness had. "Not even a little." I wanted badly to reach across the table and finish what her handwriting kept almost saying to me. But the reception hall had glass walls on 2 sides, caterers moving in and out with folding chairs. My own mother's voice audible somewhere down the corridor, discussing centerpieces at a volume that carried. There was no version of this moment that belonged to just the 2 of us. "Daniel loves me," I said instead, quiet, like I was reminding myself as much as her. "He's not a bad man. None of this is his fault." "I know that." Rachel's jaw tightened, the armor sliding back into place in real time. The same posture she'd told me about the first night, the one you build in rooms full of people looking for a reason not to take you seriously. Which is exactly why I think we shouldn't let it happen again. Whatever this is. I think we owe him that much. I didn't argue with her. I told myself it was because she was right. Because there was an entire wedding industry's worth of momentum bearing down on both of us that no amount of feeling could reasonably stop. I told myself agreeing with her silence was the mature thing, the responsible thing, the thing a good person does 5 days before her own wedding. I picked my pen back up and addressed the next envelope on the list, my handwriting noticeably worse than it had been an hour before, and said nothing at all about the part of me that had already decided her answer wasn't going to be the last word on the subject. The rehearsal dinner was held in the back garden of the same restaurant where the welcome party had started everything, though nobody but Rachel and I seemed to notice the symmetry of that. String lights strung between the trees, long tables set with the kind of casual elegance that costs more than it looks like it does. I sat at the head table between Daniel and my mother, smiling through course after course. While somewhere down the table, Rachel sat between 2 of Daniel's cousins, laughing at something, not looking at me, which I noticed more than I noticed almost anything else that night. Daniel stood for his toast right after dessert, tapping his glass with a fork in the way that always made me wince slightly, and the garden went quiet around us. "I'm not good at speeches," he started, which got the expected laugh, "so I'm going to keep this short and probably still cry." He turned to me, and his face did the thing it used to do more often, before the quiet set in, before the glass by the couch became a nightly fixture. "Nora, I remember the exact bench we were sitting on the night I knew. Riverside, by the old bridge. And you were annoyed at me because I'd shown up 20 minutes late. And you were trying so hard to stay mad, and you couldn't, because you started laughing at your own joke before I even got there. I remember the color of your coat. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the person I want telling terrible jokes at me for the rest of my life. The garden made the appropriate sound, warm and a little tearful, and my mother's hand found mine under the table. I smiled the way I was supposed to smile. And then, unbidden, my mind reached for the future the way his story had reached backward into the past, and I tried to do the same thing he'd just done. Tried to picture some specific evening 5 years from now, 10, some ordinary Tuesday in a kitchen we hadn't bought yet, his voice, a meal, anything at all. Nothing came. Not one image. It was like trying to remember a dream that had already dissolved by the time I opened my eyes. Except this wasn't a dream I was forgetting. It was a future I apparently couldn't invent in the first place, not even for the length of a toast in his honor. I tried again, quieter, more deliberate, and got only the same static, the same blank room where a life was supposed to be waiting for me. Then, without meaning to, I thought of Rachel's kitchen in Edinburgh, a place I had never seen, had no photographs of, no real information about beyond the vague shape of a life she'd described in a hotel lounge a week ago. And the picture arrived, whole and vivid and unasked for, before I could stop it. Morning light. Her handwriting on a grocery list stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like nothing in particular. The specific, ordinary weight of an entire life I had no right to be imagining, with a woman I'd known for 8 days. I understood, sitting there under the string lights with my mother's hand still warm over mine, that this wasn't about wanting something forbidden simply because it was forbidden. It was that my mind, given free rein to conjure any future it wanted, had built one in a kitchen that didn't belong to Daniel at all, without my permission, without even trying. The applause came, and I clapped along with everyone else, and Daniel sat back down beside me glowing with the specific happiness of a man who had no idea he'd just handed me the exact proof I'd been avoiding all week. Later, clearing plates with the other bridesmaids, I passed close enough to Rachel near the kitchen doorway that our shoulders brushed, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying out loud. She caught my eye for 1 second, and whatever she saw on my face made hers go very still. I went to bed that night beside a man I had loved once, honestly and completely, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful after so many weeks of avoiding it, that tomorrow I was not going to be able to keep pretending I still loved him the way the next 50 years required. Morning arrived the way mornings do when you've spent the whole night not really sleeping. Thin gray light finding its way through the curtains of a hotel room, crowded with garment bags and half-drunk cups of coffee going cold on every surface. My mother was already there when I woke, along with 2 bridesmaids and a photographer documenting the getting ready process for a highlight reel I was fairly certain I'd never be able to watch. I let them do what they needed to do. Hair, pinned and curled and sprayed into submission. Makeup, applied in careful layers by someone who kept telling me to relax my face. The dress, the one I'd said yes to without meaning it, zipped up the back by my mother's hands while she cried the way everyone had told me she would. And I stood very still and let her, because it seemed like the last easy thing I could give her. Nobody in that room seemed to notice that I hadn't said more than a dozen words since waking up. I was there, and I wasn't, both at once. My body accepting hairpins and compliments while the actual center of me sat somewhere else entirely, replaying a kitchen in Edinburgh I'd never seen, and a toast I couldn't answer honestly, and 8 days that had somehow rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. I thought, at several points that morning, about saying something. To my mother, to anyone. I opened my mouth once while she was pinning the veil, and nothing came out that I could survive saying out loud yet, so I let her finish, and told myself there would be another moment, later, better timed, less catastrophic. The car ride to the church passed in a blur of well wishes, and my father's hand tight over mine, telling me how proud he was, how beautiful I looked, how he couldn't believe his little girl was all grown up. I smiled and thanked him, and felt something in my chest twist tighter with every kind word, because every one of them assumed a version of today that I no longer believed was going to happen the way everyone expected. The church was full by the time we arrived, standing room only in the back pews. String quartet already working through something soft as the doors stayed shut, and my father walked me toward them. And for a moment, waiting there in the vestibule with the music swelling on the other side of the wood, I let myself hope that maybe walking down that aisle would fix something. Maybe seeing Daniel's face would call the old certainty back into place the way it was supposed to. The doors opened. Every head turned. I walked the length of that aisle on my father's arm the way I'd practiced, the way brides are supposed to, past faces I loved and faces I barely recognized, all of them smiling at me with the particular joy people reserve for weddings, uncomplicated and generous and completely unaware of what was actually happening behind my eyes. Daniel stood at the altar glowing, radiant in a way I hadn't seen since before the wedding planning had worn him down to whiskey and silence. And for a second, just a second, I let myself look only at him, at the boy from the porch step, at the man who'd once left notes on the kitchen counter for no reason at all. And then, because I couldn't stop myself, because some part of me had been building toward this single moment since a hotel hallway 8 days ago, my eyes moved past him. Rachel stood just to his side in her role as best woman, hands folded in front of her, dressed in deep green, and she was already looking at me. She hadn't been watching the aisle or the guests or anyone else in that church. She'd been watching me the entire time, and when our eyes finally met, properly met, across the width of that altar, everything else in the building seemed to go quiet at once. It wasn't a long look. It couldn't have lasted more than 2 or 3 seconds by any measure that mattered to anyone else in that church. But I understood, standing there in a dress I didn't love, in front of a man I'd once meant every promise to, that this single look held everything neither of us had said out loud all week. The hallway, the lounge, the kitchen I'd invented without permission, every reason we'd both given ourselves for staying quiet, and one plain, undeniable fact underneath all of it, that no amount of armor was going to keep buried for the length of a wedding ceremony. Daniel reached for my hands, smiling, waiting for me to look at him the way I was supposed to. I turned toward him, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I finally knew exactly what I was going to do. Daniel's hands closed around mine, warm and familiar and steady, exactly the way they'd always been. And the officiant began the opening words the way officiants do, welcoming everyone, thanking them for being there to witness this union. And I stood there hearing all of it from somewhere very far away. "Daniel," I said, before he could get any further, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steady enough that the officiant actually stopped mid-sentence, steady enough that a small ripple of confusion moved through the front pews. Daniel laughed, uncertain, the particular laugh of a man assuming a joke he hasn't caught up to yet. "Everything okay?" "I can't do this," I said. "I'm so sorry. I can't marry you." The church did the thing churches do when 300 people try to gasp quietly at the same time. A low collective intake of breath that seemed to pull all the air out of the room at once. Somewhere behind me, my mother made a sound I didn't have time to place. Daniel's hands went slack in mine, his face moving through confusion, then something like hope that this was a joke. Then, as my expression didn't change, something that broke in a way I will carry with me for a very long time. "Nora," he started, and I could hear, underneath the shock, the beginning of an old, familiar kindness. Even now, even here, trying to understand rather than simply react. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant almost anything in months. "You have to know that. This isn't about anything you did. I just realized, standing here, that I don't love you the way this is supposed to require. I think some part of me has known for a while, and didn't want to be the one to say it out loud." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, still holding my hands loosely, like he hadn't fully caught up to the fact that he should probably let go. I turned then, and Rachel had already stepped forward, out of her position beside him, close enough now that I only had to reach. "Rachel," I said, and that was all I needed to say. Something in her face broke open. Relief and fear and 8 days of careful restraint all at once. And she crossed the last few feet between us and took my hand without hesitating, without asking anyone in that church for permission they were never going to give. The sound that went through the guests then was louder than the first one, disbelief tipping over into something closer to chaos, chairs scraping, someone's voice rising above the rest, asking what on earth was happening. My mother's voice cutting through everything else with my name, sharp and frightened. Daniel just stood there at the altar, watching the two of us, his hands empty now. His face doing something complicated that I didn't have time to read all the way through. I didn't wait to see how the rest of it unfolded. Rachel's hand was tight around mine, and we were already moving, down the side aisle instead of the main one, past stunned faces and half-risen bodies, out through the side door into the sudden blinding daylight of a spring afternoon neither of us had expected to be running through in a wedding dress and a bridesmaid's heels. We didn't stop until we'd rounded the corner of the church, out of sight of the doors, both of us breathing hard, adrenaline and disbelief, and something that felt dangerously close to joy all tangled together. Rachel turned to me, hands coming up to my face, the way they had that first night in the hallway. And this time, there was no hesitation left in either of us. No 6 days of pretending. Nothing left to protect. She kissed me there against the side of the church, my veil coming loose in the wind, both of us laughing against each other's mouths in the particular way people laugh when something terrifying has just turned out to be the only right thing they've ever done. "That was insane," I said, when I could finally speak again. "Completely," she agreed. "Ask me if I care." Edinburgh in autumn smelled like nothing I'd grown up with. Wood smoke and cold stone and rain that never quite committed to falling. And 18 months after I'd left a church full of stunned guests in a dress I never went back for, I'd stopped noticing the smell as foreign at all. It just smelled like home now. The particular home I'd built instead of the one I'd almost signed myself into by default. The flat was small by the standards of the house I'd grown up dreaming of, tucked above a bakery on a street that curved instead of running straight, but it had Rachel's blueprints pinned across one entire wall of the second bedroom, ideas for a renovation project she was restoring more out of love than budget, and it had my own handwriting. Finally, on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like nothing in particular, exactly the way I'd pictured it without permission, that night under the string lights, except now it was simply true instead of stolen. We'd married quietly, almost a year after that first unfinished wedding. No string quartet, no 300 guests, just a registry office and a handful of people who mattered, and Rachel's hands only slightly steadier than mine, as we said words we actually meant to each other. My mother came around eventually, in the slow, imperfect way mothers do. Daniel and I hadn't spoken in months, and then, unexpectedly, we had a stiff, careful phone call that ended, against all odds, in something like peace. Both of us finally allowed to be honest about a life that had never quite fit either of us the way everyone assumed it should. That morning, I stood in the kitchen with a mug of tea going cold in my hands, watching the rain finally decide to fall against the window, and felt the particular flutter low in my stomach that I'd been waiting 3 weeks to confirm wasn't nerves or coffee or imagination. Rachel found me there when she came down, still half asleep, hair loose the way it never was for meetings anymore, and stopped in the doorway when she saw my face. "You're smiling at the rain," she said. "That's new. The clinic called back," I said. "It worked. First round even." She went very still for a moment, the way she does when something matters more than she has words ready for, and then she crossed the kitchen and pulled me into her, both of us laughing into each other's shoulders in the specific, disbelieving way people laugh when a future they'd only recently let themselves imagine finally, impossibly arrives. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and unhurried, over a city that had somehow become the exact shape of everything I hadn't known I was allowed to want. Thank you so much for listening to Nora and Rachel's story all the way to the end. If you loved this one, tap subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next release, and drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest. I read every single one. If you want early access to new stories, extended scenes, and behind-the-story content, you'll find all of it over on Patreon at patreon.com/cc Forbidden Romances. Thank you again for being here. I'll see you in the next story.